Some things in life just won't die, like Bitcoin and skinny jeans. One thing that has stuck around since the dawn of time has been bad public speaking advice. Public speaking tips get passed around like the flu at a daycare, and frankly, I'm sick of it. You take fitness advice from health experts, computer advice from tech whizzes, and relationship advice from dating coaches. Yet, everyone seems to think they're qualified to espouse public speaking advice. And most of the time, their tips are garbage. This is where I come in. I've been coaching speech for over 8 years, and as a competitive public speaker, won 2 national titles myself. Today, I've compiled a list of 3 popular pieces of public speaking advice that are actually terrible. In this video, I'm going to walk you through each terrible piece of advice, explain why it's awful, and tell you what to do instead. So, without any further ado, let's get into it. Now, the first tip is something we've all heard before. If you're nervous, just picture the audience in their underwear.
Squidward, try to imagine him in his underwear. Oh no, he's hot!
The fact that this tip is ubiquitous baffles me. Not only is it really weird, but it doesn't work. This is for 2 main reasons. First, if you're nervous to give a speech, the main problem area is what's going on before you speak, not during. This advice, if it did somehow work, doesn't help you when you need it most. But even if this advice did apply at the right time, it still wouldn't be effective because it fundamentally misunderstands what makes us nervous in the first place. The general logic of this advice, if you can call it that, is that crowds are intimidating. And so if you picture them in their underwear, then you'll be less intimidated while giving a speech. This makes absolutely no sense. Crowds are not intimidating because they're wearing clothes, but because back in ancient times, if you were in front of a crowd speaking and they didn't like what you had to say, you were toast. And keep in mind, that is the case whether or not they were wearing clothes. This fear is hardwired into our brains, and there's actually a much better solution to the dilemma. While I have tons of advice on how to get over nerves while public speaking, my best advice boils down to 2 steps. First, reframe how you think about speech anxiety. It's not a bad thing to be nervous, because nerves mean you care. Instead, use that anxiety as fuel to rehearse your speech extra hard. This leads us to the second step, which is to become deeply familiar with your speech, or even memorize it. If you don't know how to memorize a speech, I have an entire video dedicated to the subject right here. But the nuts and bolts of it are this. If you're deeply familiar with your speech, or even have it memorized, you can turn your brain on autopilot while you speak. The funny thing about nerves is that it's really just about you getting in your own head while you speak. So if you can override that system or bypass it completely, then nerves won't affect you. Guess what? Even after all these years of coaching and delivering speeches, I still get nervous. But I use those nerves to fuel my rehearsal, become deeply familiar with my speech, and then when the time comes to present, I'm so comfortable with the material that I can essentially turn off my brain and deliver the speech with ease. Now let's move on to the second terrible tip. The second tip is to move around the room while you speak. Now, this is not inherently bad advice, but what it often translates to is pacing around the room while you speak. I cannot tell you the number of TED Talks I've seen where the speaker literally doesn't stand still for 1 second. This is a problem because it doesn't come across as you commanding the room, but rather as nervous energy. When it comes to public speaking, it doesn't matter how you feel on the inside. What matters is how the audience perceives you. And if you're pacing around the room the entire time, even if you feel super comfortable doing so, the audience is going to perceive you as nervous. On the other hand, If you stand in one spot the entire time, you will exude confidence, reassuring the audience that you know what you're doing. Now, I want to be clear, this is not what I'm advocating for. You shouldn't just stand in one spot for the entire speech, because there are some benefits to commanding the room through movement. What I am arguing for is to incorporate that movement as a modality to transition between ideas. To take advantage of movement, you should stand in one spot for an entire idea in your speech. This usually goes up to an entire paragraph. Then, when you're ready to transition to a new idea or a new paragraph, walk over to a new spot in the room, plant your feet, and deliver that next idea. This allows you to reap the benefits of the confidence of a strong standstill position while still commanding the room through movement. Let's move on to the third and final tip. Now, the third tip is probably the worst offender on the list, and that's because it extends beyond public speaking. I see English teachers preach this as the best way to start your in-class essay, and I've got to be honest, this needs to end. Starting your speech with a question. We've all heard it before. You need to hook your audience in with a thought-provoking question to open up your speech. The problem is that these questions usually are nonsensical, rhetorical questions that mean nothing and grab nobody's attention. They usually sound like this.
Have you ever thought about blank before? I know I have.
As an audience member, if I hear a speaker start their speech this way, I want to cut off my ears. Like, could you imagine if I started this video by saying,
Have you ever thought about public speaking before? I know I have.
You probably wouldn't even then be watching this video because YouTube would have taken it down for harming the audience. So how should you open your speech instead? I recommend sticking to the 8 words or less principle. This principle states that the opening line of your speech should be confined to 8 words or less. This keeps the audience on their toes and builds intrigue for what comes next. And there you have it. 3 popular pieces of public speaking advice that are actually garbage and what you should do instead. By now, you should know how to actually ameliorate your nerves, incorporate movement into your speech, and start your speech with an effective attention getter. However, if you'd like more personalized one-on-one help with your speech, I do offer coaching and speech reviews on my website at justincooperspeech.com. The link is in the description. And last, as always, remember to speak up.